I stand in my childhood bedroom staring at my wedding dress, hanging lifeless in the closet, while my sister Madison prepares downstairs for what should have been my wedding day. Madison had convinced our parents to let her use my venue date and vendors after claiming my fiancé Derek was just a construction worker, unworthy of their family's investment. When Madison looked me in the eye 3 hours ago and said, "You can cry later, this day belongs to me," she had no idea Derek owned the largest development company in 3 states. 2 weeks ago, everything in my life felt perfect. I had spent 18 months planning every detail of what would be the most beautiful wedding Boston had ever seen. Derek and I had chosen the Westwood Country Club, reserved the vintage ballroom with crystal chandeliers, selected white peonies and blush roses for the centerpieces, and even hired a string quartet that had performed at the Symphony Hall. My Vera Wang dress hung in my closet like a promise of forever, and I counted down the days until I would become Mrs. Derek Morrison. Then Madison returned from Europe. My sister swept through the front door of our Beacon Hill mansion. Like a hurricane, her designer luggage scattered across the marble foyer, claiming she had urgent news that couldn't wait. She announced that her modeling career in Paris had led to an incredible opportunity, but she needed to marry her boyfriend Trevor immediately to secure a business deal that would make the family millions. Madison had always been the golden child. At 28, 2 years older than me, she possessed the kind of effortless beauty that stopped conversations in restaurants. Her auburn hair caught light like spun copper, her green eyes could convince anyone of anything, and her smile had graced magazine covers across Europe, or so she claimed. While I pursued my marketing degree at Boston University and built a steady relationship with Derek over 3 years, Madison jet set it across the continent, sending postcards from Milan, Barcelona, and Rome. Our parents, Harold and Patricia, bragged about her international success to their country club friends, displaying her supposed magazine covers in the study like trophies. But something felt wrong about Madison's sudden return. She burst into the family dining room that Tuesday evening, interrupting our weekly dinner with Trevor, trailing behind her like a confused puppy. Trevor Ashworth appeared nervous, his blonde hair perfectly styled, but his blue eyes darting around the room, as if searching for escape routes. He kept adjusting his expensive watch and clearing his throat before every sentence. Madison announced her engagement with theatrical flair, displaying a massive emerald ring that caught the lamplight. She explained that Trevor's family owned a tech company in Silicon Valley, and their marriage would secure a merger worth $50 million. But the wedding needed to happen within 2 weeks on my exact wedding date using my exact arrangements. The manipulation began immediately. Madison painted Derek as beneath our family's social standing. She claimed her research into his background revealed concerning information about his financial stability and business associations. She suggested that Derek's construction work involved questionable clients and that his modest apartment indicated serious money problems. Trevor confirmed Madison's story, though his voice shook when he described the supposed business opportunity. He claimed his family's company needed immediate capital investment, and Madison's European connections could provide the international market access they required. Our parents listened with growing concern. Harold, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp business instincts, prided himself on making sound financial decisions. He had built his political consulting firm from nothing into one of Boston's most influential agencies. Patricia, elegant and refined, came from old Boston money and valued social status above almost everything else. Madison knew exactly how to appeal to their priorities. She presented documents that appeared to show Derek's limited business licenses, basic contractor credentials, and modest bank account balances. She had somehow obtained copies of his tax returns that showed yearly earnings barely reaching $40,000. She suggested that my relationship with Derek represented a step down from the family's expectations. Meanwhile, Madison displayed Trevor's supposed credentials, Harvard Business School graduation, family connections to major tech companies, and investment portfolios worth millions. She painted their wedding as a strategic alliance that would elevate the entire family's status. I tried defending Derek, explaining that he worked incredibly hard and that his character mattered more than his bank account, but Madison had planted seeds of doubt that grew quickly in our parents' minds. The most devastating blow came when Madison revealed she had been monitoring Derek's activities and discovered what she called red flags in his business relationships. She claimed he associated with people involved in questionable construction deals and that his recent absences indicated possible legal troubles. None of it made sense to me. Derek had always been honest about his work, though he often seemed modest about his achievements. He worked long hours on various projects around the city, and his knowledge of architecture and development impressed everyone who met him. But Madison's evidence seemed overwhelming. Then I discovered the first lie. While Madison showed our parents her modeling portfolio, I noticed several inconsistencies. The magazine covers looked suspiciously familiar, and when I examined them closely later, I realized they featured different models whose faces had been digitally replaced with Madison's. The dates didn't align with her supposed European timeline, and the magazine names belonged to publications that had ceased printing years ago. But the damage was already done. Harold and Patricia had decided that Madison's wedding represented the family's best interests, while my relationship with Derek posed potential social and financial risks. Madison smiled triumphantly when they announced their decision. She would use my venue, my flowers, my dress, and my dream wedding to secure her own future. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The cruelest twist came when I discovered Madison's real situation. While searching for aspirin in her purse the next morning, I found collection notices from Parisian creditors, overdue rent bills, and correspondence from debt collectors demanding immediate payment of enormous sums. Madison wasn't a successful model fleeing Europe because of a business opportunity. She was a con artist fleeing Europe because of massive debts and legal troubles. But she had already convinced our parents that her wedding was essential for the family's future, while mine was a costly mistake that could ruin our reputation. 3 days before what should have been the happiest day of my life, our family gathered in the mahogany-paneled library for a formal discussion about the wedding arrangements. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs that had belonged to our family for generations. Patricia sat rigidly in her favorite wingback chair, her pearls catching the light as she adjusted her silk blouse. Harold stood behind his imposing desk, his expression grave as he shuffled through a stack of documents. Madison entered the room like she owned it, wearing a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She had styled her hair in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless, despite claiming she had been crying all morning about the family crisis. Trevor followed her, looking uncomfortable in his navy blazer and khakis, his hands shaking slightly as he carried a leather portfolio. I felt underdressed in my simple blue sweater and jeans, but I had spent the morning at Derek's apartment trying unsuccessfully to reach him by phone. His landlord mentioned he had left for Chicago unexpectedly, and I couldn't understand why he hadn't called to explain his absence. Harold cleared his throat and began the meeting with the formality he usually reserved for business negotiations. He explained that the family had reached a difficult decision after careful consideration of everyone's best interests. Madison's marriage to Trevor represented an opportunity that could benefit the entire family for generations, while my engagement to Derek posed risks they couldn't ignore. Patricia spoke next, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making social decisions for the family. She described the extensive background check they had commissioned on Derek, which revealed what she called troubling inconsistencies in his financial disclosures and business relationships. She suggested that Derek had deliberately misrepresented his situation, to gain access to our family's wealth and social connections. The accusations stung because they attacked Derek's integrity, which I knew was unshakable. Derek had never asked my family for money or favors. He insisted on paying for our dates, refused expensive gifts, and often seemed embarrassed when our conversations turned to family wealth or social obligations. Madison presented additional evidence during the meeting, including photographs that allegedly showed Derek meeting with people she described as questionable business associates. She had copies of contracts that seemed to indicate Derek was involved in construction projects with companies that had faced legal challenges. She even produced witness statements from workers who claimed Derek had made concerning comments about easy money and wealthy clients. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't identify specific flaws in her evidence. Harold announced that Madison would use all the wedding arrangements I had made, from the venue reservation to the floral designs. He explained that canceling everything would result in enormous financial losses, while transferring the arrangements to Madison would serve the family's greater good. The decision was final and not subject to discussion. The most painful moment came when Madison displayed the engagement ring she would wear during her ceremony. She had somehow obtained our great-grandmother's emerald and diamond ring, a family heirloom that had been promised to me since childhood. The ring had belonged to 5 generations of women in our family, and I had always imagined Derek sliding it onto my finger during his proposal. Madison held up her hand, showing how perfectly the antique ring complemented her manicured nails and delicate wrist. She mentioned that Trevor's family had specifically requested she wear a significant family heirloom to demonstrate the union's importance and permanence. I attempted to defend Derek, explaining that his character and work ethic mattered more than financial status or social connections. I described his kindness, his intelligence, his dreams of building beautiful homes for families across New England. But every word I spoke seemed to confirm their belief that I was naive and easily manipulated by a charming opportunist. Harold dismissed my protests with the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. He suggested that Derek's recent disappearance proved his unreliability and demonstrated his true intentions. A man genuinely committed to marriage wouldn't abandon his fiancée 3 days before their wedding to pursue business opportunities in another city. Patricia added that Derek's failure to contact the family during his absence showed disrespect for proper social protocols. A suitable husband would maintain communication with his future in-laws and ensure everyone felt comfortable with the wedding arrangements. Madison sat quietly during my defense of Derek, occasionally nodding sympathetically as if she understood my emotional attachment but recognized the need for practical decisions. She mentioned that breaking up with Derek now would spare me greater heartbreak later when his true nature became impossible to ignore. The meeting ended with Harold's announcement that I could choose to attend Madison's wedding as a supportive sister or remove myself from the family until I came to my senses about Derek's unsuitability. There would be no discussion, no negotiation, and no delay. As everyone prepared to leave the library, Madison approached me with what appeared to be genuine concern. She placed her hand on my shoulder and spoke in the gentle tone she had used when we were children, and she wanted to convince me to share my toys or cover for her when she broke something valuable. She explained that she was trying to protect me from making a terrible mistake that would ruin my future. She had seen how charming men could manipulate wealthy women in Europe, and Derek exhibited all the warning signs of someone seeking financial security through marriage rather than genuine love. Then Madison revealed the most devastating information of all. She claimed that Derek had been in contact with her privately for several weeks, asking questions about family finances, investment strategies, and inheritance plans. She suggested that Derek had been using their relationship to gather information for purposes she didn't want to imagine. None of it aligned with the Derek I knew, but Madison's evidence seemed comprehensive, and her concern appeared genuine. The twist that shattered my remaining hope came when Madison showed me copies of email exchanges between Derek and someone named Marcus Chen. The emails discussed investigation strategies, financial backgrounds, and timeline planning. Madison interpreted these as evidence that Derek was working with associates to research and potentially defraud wealthy families. She explained that Derek's construction work might be a cover for more sophisticated criminal activities, and his sudden departure to Chicago could indicate he was fleeing before authorities discovered his schemes. I left the meeting feeling completely isolated and confused. My family had turned against Derek based on evidence I couldn't refute, and Derek himself had disappeared without explanation at the worst possible moment. But something deep inside me refused to accept that Derek was the person Madison described. The man I loved was honest, hardworking, and genuine. There had to be an explanation that made sense of everything. I just had to find it before Madison's wedding destroyed any chance of discovering the truth. The days following the family meeting passed like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every morning, I reached for my phone hoping to find missed calls or messages from Derek explaining his sudden disappearance. Instead, I found only silence and the growing certainty that something terrible had happened to the man I loved. Derek's absence felt completely out of character. During our 3-year relationship, he had never gone more than a few hours without returning my calls. He sent good morning texts every day, called during lunch breaks, and always confirmed our evening plans. His sudden radio silence made no sense unless something had prevented him from contacting me. I drove to his apartment complex in Cambridge, a modest brick building near the river where graduate students and young professionals rented affordable units. Derek had lived there for 2 years, and I knew his neighbors well enough to wave hello when we passed in the hallways. Mrs. Rodriguez from the first floor always asked about wedding plans, and Mr. Patel, who lived next door, often borrowed Derek's tools for household repairs. But Derek's apartment stood empty. The landlord, a kind, elderly man named Frank, met me in the parking lot and explained that Derek had terminated his lease unexpectedly. Frank seemed confused because Derek had always been an ideal tenant who paid rent early and maintained the property beautifully. Derek had mentioned a work opportunity that required relocation, but he hadn't provided details about his destination or timeline. Frank handed me a forwarding address card that listed a post office box in Chicago, Illinois. The address meant nothing to me, and Derek had never mentioned connections to Chicago beyond occasional business trips that lasted only a few days. I searched Derek's abandoned apartment for clues about his departure. The space felt hollow without his furniture and personal belongings, but I noticed he had left behind small items that seemed important: a framed photo of us from last Christmas, his collection of architecture books, and the custom drafting tools he used for work projects. Derek would never abandon his professional equipment unless something urgent had forced him to leave immediately. Madison appeared at the apartment while I searched for answers, claiming she had come to help me accept reality about Derek's abandonment. She seemed surprisingly well-informed about Derek's lease termination and relocation timeline, almost as if she had been monitoring his activities more closely than she had admitted. She brought additional evidence about Derek's situation that painted an even darker picture of his motivations and character. Madison showed me what appeared to be police reports indicating Derek had been arrested in Chicago for contractor fraud and conspiracy charges. The documents looked official, complete with case numbers, arrest dates, and detailed allegations about construction scams targeting wealthy clients. According to Madison's information, Derek had been running fraudulent home improvement schemes across multiple states using fake credentials and inflated contracts to steal money from unsuspecting homeowners. The Chicago arrest was apparently the culmination of a multi-state investigation into his criminal activities. Madison explained that Derek's disappearance wasn't abandonment, but flight from prosecution. She suggested he had been using our relationship to establish credibility and social connections that would help him access wealthier victims in Boston's affluent neighborhoods. The evidence seemed overwhelming, but something about Madison's presentation felt rehearsed and convenient. Harold arrived at the apartment shortly after Madison, expressing concern about my emotional state and determination to pursue a relationship with someone facing serious criminal charges. He brought official-looking documents that appeared to confirm Derek's legal troubles and strongly advised me to distance myself from the situation before it damaged our family's reputation. Harold explained that Derek's arrest had been reported in Chicago newspapers and the story would eventually reach Boston media outlets. My continued association with Derek could result in embarrassing publicity that would harm Harold's political consulting business and damage the family's standing in Boston society. Patricia called that evening to reinforce the message that Derek had revealed his true nature by abandoning me during a crisis and fleeing to avoid criminal prosecution. She suggested that Madison's quick thinking and investigative efforts had protected our family from a potentially devastating scandal. But the most disturbing revelation came when I attempted to contact Derek's employer to verify Madison's claims about his criminal activities. Derek had always described working for Morrison Construction, a small but reputable company that specialized in residential and commercial projects throughout New England. He spoke proudly about his projects, often showing me photographs of beautiful homes and buildings his team had completed. When I called Morrison Construction, the receptionist seemed confused by my questions about Derek's employment and legal troubles. She transferred me to the owner, a gruff but friendly man named Bill Morrison, who had known Derek for several years. Bill's response stunned me. He explained that Derek hadn't worked for Morrison Construction in over 18 months. Derek had left to pursue what Bill described as a major opportunity with a much larger development company. Bill remembered Derek being excited about the new position, but secretive about the details due to confidentiality agreements. Bill had no knowledge of any criminal charges or legal troubles involving Derek. In fact, he described Derek as one of the most honest and talented people he had ever employed, someone who could have succeeded anywhere in the construction industry. The discrepancy between Madison's evidence and Bill's information created more questions than answers. If Derek hadn't been working for Morrison Construction, what had he been doing for the past 18 months? Why had he continued claiming to work there when he clearly had other employment? And why would he lie about something so basic when he had always been honest about everything else? The most chilling discovery came when I found evidence that someone had been intercepting my communications with Derek. While reviewing my email account for messages I might have missed, I discovered that several emails from Derek's address had been automatically forwarded to an address I didn't recognize. The forwarding rule had been created weeks earlier, and I certainly hadn't set it up myself. Someone had gained access to my email account and had been monitoring my correspondence with Derek. Madison's knowledge about Derek's activities suddenly seemed more sinister than helpful. If she had been intercepting our communications, she would have known about Derek's real job situation, his travel plans, and his attempts to contact me during his Chicago trip. She could have prevented me from receiving important messages and could have sent responses that Derek would interpret as coming from me. The twist that changed everything came when I discovered Madison had somehow gained access to Derek's phone account as well. Derek's cell phone carrier confirmed that call forwarding had been activated on his number, redirecting all incoming calls to a number registered under Madison's name. Text messages were being automatically copied to the same number, giving Madison complete access to Derek's communications. Madison hadn't just been monitoring Derek's activities. She had been actively sabotaging our relationship by controlling our ability to communicate with each other. Derek's sudden disappearance and apparent abandonment made perfect sense if he believed I had been ignoring his calls and messages while rejecting his attempts to explain his situation. Madison had orchestrated Derek's absence by convincing him that I had chosen family money over our relationship and that I wanted nothing more to do with him. The woman I had trusted to help me understand Derek's disappearance was actually the person responsible for destroying our relationship. Dawn broke gray and cold over Boston, matching my emotional state as I prepared to watch my sister marry her boyfriend, using every detail of the wedding I had planned for Derek and myself. The irony felt like a cruel joke from the universe, forcing me to participate in the destruction of my own dreams while pretending to support Madison's happiness. I had barely slept during the past week, spending most nights researching Derek's situation and trying to piece together the truth behind Madison's allegations. Every lead pointed toward elaborate deception, but I couldn't prove Madison's involvement in sabotaging my relationship without concrete evidence that would convince my parents. Madison had transformed our family home into her personal bridal suite, taking over the master guest bedroom and commanding an army of stylists, photographers, and wedding coordinators who treated her like royalty. She had hired the same makeup artist I had planned to use, selected the same hairstylist who had done my engagement photos, and even insisted on wearing my custom-designed shoes because they matched her dress perfectly. The cruelest detail was the dress itself. Madison emerged from her preparation room wearing my Vera Wang gown, which fit her like it had been designed specifically for her body. The silk bodice with hand-sewn pearls caught the morning light streaming through tall windows, and the cathedral train flowed behind her like liquid ivory. She had made minor alterations to accommodate her slightly taller frame, but the overall effect was exactly what I had envisioned for my own wedding day. Madison posed for photographs in the same spot where I had planned to take my bridal portraits, using the same ornate mirror that had reflected 5 generations of brides in our family. She held the same bouquet of white peonies and blush roses that I had chosen after visiting dozens of florists, and she wore our great-grandmother's emerald ring on the same finger where Derek's engagement ring should have been. Watching Madison prepare for her wedding felt like witnessing the theft of my entire identity. Patricia fluttered around Madison like an anxious butterfly, adjusting the dress train and ensuring every detail met her exacting standards for social presentation. She praised Madison's elegant appearance and expressed gratitude that the family would finally experience the kind of wedding that matched their status and expectations. Patricia made pointed comments about the relief she felt knowing Madison had chosen a suitable husband who could provide financial security and social advancement. She contrasted Trevor's family background and business prospects with what she described as Derek's questionable associations and limited opportunities. The comparison stung because Patricia was essentially saying she preferred Madison's lies to Derek's honest work and genuine character. Harold reviewed the guest list and seating arrangements, noting the presence of influential politicians, business leaders, and social figures who would witness Madison's marriage. He explained how Trevor's family connections would benefit our family's business interests and expand their network within Boston's elite circles. Harold seemed genuinely pleased about the wedding's potential to advance his political consulting firm and strengthen his position within the community. He viewed Madison's marriage as a strategic alliance rather than a romantic celebration, which explained why he had dismissed my relationship with Derek so easily. The house filled with activity as vendors arrived to transport flowers, decorations, and supplies to the Westwood Country Club. The same people who had worked with me to plan my dream wedding now followed Madison's instructions as if she had been the bride all along. I watched the florists load white peonies and blush roses into their van, knowing those flowers would decorate tables where Derek and I should have celebrated with our friends and family. The musicians packed instruments they would use to play songs Derek and I had chosen together, and the photographers prepared equipment to capture moments that should have belonged to us. Madison requested my help with final preparations, asking me to fasten her pearl necklace and arrange her veil for transport to the venue. She spoke with the excited energy of a woman living her perfect day, completely ignoring the devastation her actions had caused. But I noticed something different about Madison's behavior that morning. Beneath her bridal excitement, she seemed nervous in a way that had nothing to do with normal wedding day jitters. She kept checking her phone for messages, glancing toward windows, as if watching for unwanted arrivals and asking questions about guest confirmations that suggested she was concerned about specific people attending. Trevor appeared even more anxious than Madison. He arrived at the house early, dressed in his formal tuxedo but sweating despite the cool morning temperature. His hands shook as he accepted congratulations from family members, and he kept stepping outside to make private phone calls that seemed to distress him further. I overheard one of Trevor's conversations while arranging flowers in the foyer. He was speaking to someone about timeline complications and expressing concern about maintaining appearances until after the ceremony. His voice carried the tension of someone managing a crisis rather than celebrating his wedding day. Madison's maid of honor, Courtney, arrived with gossip that provided the first hint of Madison's real situation in Europe. Courtney had flown in from New York specifically for the wedding, and she seemed surprised by the elaborate arrangements and expensive details. While helping Madison with her jewelry, Courtney mentioned that she had expected a much smaller ceremony given Madison's recent financial difficulties in Paris. Madison quickly silenced Courtney with sharp looks and subject changes, but not before Courtney revealed that Madison's European debts totaled over $200,000 and that creditors had been threatening legal action for months. Courtney seemed unaware that she was exposing Madison's lies to the family. She continued sharing details about Madison's struggles to find work, her eviction from expensive apartments, and her desperate search for wealthy men who could solve her financial problems. Madison's European modeling career was revealed as a series of failed attempts to support herself through questionable relationships with older men who provided temporary financial assistance in exchange for companionship. The most shocking revelation came when Courtney mentioned Madison's pregnancy claim. According to Courtney, Madison had been discussing pregnancy strategies for months as a way to secure marriage commitments from wealthy targets. Courtney assumed Trevor was aware of Madison's deception and was participating willingly in exchange for some kind of business benefit. But Trevor's increasingly agitated behavior suggested he might not know about Madison's pregnancy fraud. I realized that Trevor was probably being manipulated just as severely as Derek and I had been. Madison had likely presented him with false information about my family's wealth, business connections, and social influence while hiding her own desperate circumstances and criminal background. The wedding was shaping up to be a collision between multiple layers of deception, with innocent people trapped in Madison's elaborate scheme. As we prepared to leave for the venue, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of passively watching Madison destroy more lives with her lies, I would spend the wedding day gathering evidence to expose her fraud and protect the people she was manipulating. Derek deserved the truth about what had happened to our relationship. Trevor deserved to know about Madison's deception before committing his life to someone who was using him. And my parents deserved to understand how thoroughly Madison had manipulated their emotions and judgment. The wedding day would be Madison's moment of triumph, but it would also be the day her elaborate deception finally unraveled. The Westwood Country Club stood majestically against the autumn sky, its colonial architecture and manicured grounds providing the perfect backdrop for what should have been the most beautiful day of my life. Instead, I arrived as a reluctant observer to my sister's theft of my dreams, watching vendors unload decorations and flowers that I had personally selected 18 months earlier. The venue looked exactly as I had envisioned for Derek's and my celebration, White peonies and blush roses adorned every table. Crystal candelabras caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the vintage ballroom sparkled with the same elegant touches I had obsessed over during months of planning. But something felt different about the staff's behavior as they prepared for Madison's ceremony. Janet Peterson, the venue manager who had worked closely with me throughout the planning process, approached me with obvious confusion written across her face. Janet was a professional woman in her 50s who had coordinated hundreds of weddings at Westwood, and she prided herself on managing every detail flawlessly. Janet pulled me aside while Madison posed for photographs in the garden, speaking in the discreet tone she used when discussing sensitive client matters. She explained that several unusual circumstances surrounding today's event had left her feeling uncertain about proper protocols and vendor relationships. The first surprise came when Janet mentioned Derek's recent visit to the venue. According to Janet, Derek had arrived at Westwood 3 days earlier, not to cancel arrangements as Madison had suggested, but to finalize expensive upgrades and additions to our original wedding package. He had personally approved premium champagne service, upgraded the menu to include lobster and filet mignon, and arranged for a private bridal suite with luxury amenities. Derek had also requested specific musical selections for the ceremony and reception, including a string quartet performance of pieces that held special meaning for our relationship. He had seemed excited and nervous, like a groom, ensuring every detail would create perfect memories for his bride. Janet couldn't understand why Derek would invest thousands of dollars in wedding upgrades if he was planning to abandon me or flee from criminal prosecution. His behavior had been that of a man deeply in love and committed to creating a magical wedding experience. The second revelation concerned Derek's business relationship with Westwood itself. Janet explained that Derek's company, Morrison Development Group, had been the general contractor for Westwood's recent renovation projects. Derek had personally supervised the restoration of the ballroom's historical features, the modernization of kitchen facilities, and the construction of new guest accommodations. Morrison Development Group was not the small construction company Derek had claimed to work for, but rather one of New England's most respected development firms. Derek's role involved managing multi-million-dollar projects and maintaining relationships with prestigious clients throughout the region. Janet considered Derek one of Westwood's most valued business partners and had been shocked to hear about his supposed legal troubles and criminal activities. The Derek she knew was professional, reliable, and respected throughout the industry for his integrity and craftsmanship. The third surprise came when Janet showed me security footage from Derek's recent visit. The surveillance video revealed Derek arriving at Westwood alone, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the professional attire he used for important business meetings. He spent several hours reviewing arrangements, inspecting decorative details, and discussing logistics with various vendors. But the most significant moment occurred when Derek left an envelope with Janet's assistant, specifically requesting that it be given to me if any questions arose about his whereabouts or intentions. The envelope was marked "For Sylvia's eyes only" in Derek's distinctive handwriting. Janet had been waiting for an appropriate moment to deliver the envelope, but Madison's sudden takeover of the wedding arrangements had created confusion about proper protocols. Janet wasn't sure whether she should present Derek's message during Madison's ceremony or wait for a more appropriate time. I requested the envelope immediately. Janet retrieved Derek's message from her office safe, where she stored important client documents and valuables. The envelope felt substantial, suggesting it contained multiple pages rather than a simple note or explanation. But before I could open Derek's message, Madison appeared with demands for Janet's immediate attention regarding last-minute changes to the reception timeline. Madison seemed agitated by my private conversation with Janet and insisted that all venue discussions include her input as the bride. Madison's behavior raised additional questions about her knowledge of Derek's situation and her role in creating the current crisis. Janet excused herself to address Madison's concerns, but she discreetly handed me Derek's envelope with instructions to read it privately when I had sufficient time to process whatever information it contained. I tucked the envelope into my purse, planning to find a quiet moment during the reception to discover Derek's explanation for his mysterious disappearance and apparent abandonment. The fourth revelation came from an unexpected source. While reviewing final arrangements in the kitchen, I encountered Miguel Santos, the executive chef who had worked with Derek and me to design our wedding menu. Miguel was a talented professional who took personal pride in creating memorable dining experiences for special celebrations. Miguel seemed surprised to see Madison wearing my dress and claiming credit for menu selections that Derek and I had carefully planned together. He mentioned that Derek had visited the kitchen recently to discuss additional courses and wine pairings that would complement the meal perfectly. According to Miguel, Derek had spoken enthusiastically about surprising me with special touches that would make our wedding dinner unforgettable. Derek had arranged for my favorite dessert, requested specific wines that held meaning for our relationship, and even planned a custom cocktail named after the street where we had first met. Miguel couldn't understand why Derek would invest so much personal attention in wedding details if he was planning to disappear before the ceremony. The Derek he knew was genuinely excited about marrying me and creating beautiful memories for our families and friends. But the most shocking information came when Miguel mentioned Derek's recent phone call about timeline changes. Derek had contacted the kitchen 2 days earlier, not to cancel arrangements, but to confirm that all preparations would proceed as planned, despite what he called temporary communication difficulties with the family. Derek had seemed concerned about ensuring the wedding celebration would be perfect, even if he couldn't be present for final coordination meetings. Derek's message suggested he was aware of interference with his communications, but was determined to ensure our wedding would be everything we had planned together. The twist that changed my understanding of everything came when Janet returned with additional information about Derek's business activities. Janet explained that Morrison Development Group was currently involved in the largest commercial development project in Chicago's history, a multi-billion-dollar mixed-use complex that would transform an entire downtown district. Derek's role as project director required his presence in Chicago for several weeks to coordinate construction phases and manage relationships with city officials. Derek's trip to Chicago wasn't flight from criminal prosecution, but rather supervision of a career-defining project that would establish Morrison Development Group as one of America's premier development companies. Janet had assumed I knew about Derek's important business responsibilities and his temporary relocation to manage the Chicago project. She couldn't understand why his work commitments would create family conflicts or relationship problems. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Derek hadn't abandoned me or fled from legal troubles. He was in Chicago fulfilling professional obligations that would secure our financial future and advance his career to levels that would impress even my status-conscious parents. Madison had systematically destroyed my relationship with Derek by intercepting our communications, presenting false evidence about his character and activities, and manipulating my family's emotions with lies about his intentions and background. Derek probably believed I had rejected him in favor of family money and social expectations. He was alone in Chicago, thinking the woman he loved had chosen her privileged upbringing over their relationship, unaware that Madison had orchestrated the entire crisis. I clutched Derek's envelope, knowing it contained explanations and truths that would expose Madison's elaborate deception. But first, I needed to find a private moment to read Derek's message and understand the full scope of what Madison had done to destroy our happiness. The wedding ceremony was about to begin, and I realized I was watching more than the theft of my wedding arrangements. I was witnessing the culmination of a sophisticated fraud that had destroyed genuine love in service of Madison's desperate lies. I found refuge in the bridal suite Derek had arranged as a surprise, a beautifully appointed room overlooking the country club's gardens, where brides could have quiet moments before their ceremonies. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hiding in the space Derek had created for my comfort reading his letter while Madison prepared to marry another man using our wedding plans. My hands shook as I opened the envelope marked, "For Sylvia's eyes only," uncertain whether Derek's message would provide answers or create more confusion about our relationship and his mysterious disappearance. The envelope contained several pages of Derek's careful handwriting, along with official documents that would change everything I thought I knew about the man I loved. Derek's letter began with an apology for the secrecy that had surrounded his work and travel, explaining that confidentiality agreements had prevented him from sharing details about his career advancement and business responsibilities. He wrote that he had planned to reveal everything after our honeymoon, wanting to surprise me with news about our financial security and future opportunities. The first revelation concerned Derek's true employment situation. Derek explained that he hadn't worked for Morrison Construction in over 18 months, but not because of criminal activities or professional failures as Madison had suggested. Instead, Derek had inherited Morrison Development Group, one of New England's largest construction companies, when his grandfather passed away, unexpectedly. Derek's grandfather, Thomas Morrison, had built the company from a small residential contractor into a regional powerhouse handling major commercial projects throughout New England. Thomas had maintained controlling interest in the company while allowing professional managers to handle daily operations, and he had quietly groomed Derek to eventually take over the family business. When Thomas died suddenly from a heart attack, Derek inherited not only the company, but also several ongoing projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The inheritance included commercial properties throughout Boston, development rights for premium locations, and contracts with major clients seeking luxury residential and commercial construction. Derek had been working secretly to understand his new responsibilities and ensure the company's continued success under his leadership. The modest lifestyle he maintained during our relationship reflected his desire to prove himself through hard work, rather than inherited wealth, not financial limitations or questionable business practices. The second revelation explained Derek's recent travels and communication difficulties. Derek wrote that Morrison Development Group had been selected to lead a massive urban renewal project in downtown Chicago, transforming a neglected warehouse district into a mixed-use complex featuring luxury condominiums, office buildings, and retail spaces. The project represented the largest contract in the company's history and would establish Derek as one of America's youngest successful developers. The Chicago project required Derek's presence for several weeks to coordinate with city planners, architectural firms, and financial institutions providing construction financing. The timeline had accelerated unexpectedly when environmental clearances were approved ahead of schedule, forcing Derek to travel immediately to avoid losing the contract. Derek had attempted to contact me multiple times during his Chicago trip, but his calls weren't being returned, and his messages received responses that confused and hurt him deeply. Someone claiming to be me had sent emails accusing him of lying about his work, questioning his commitment to our relationship, and demanding space to reconsider our engagement. The third revelation provided evidence of systematic communication sabotage. Derek had hired a private investigator named Marcus Williams to determine why his communications with me had been disrupted and why I seemed to be rejecting him after 3 years of loving relationship. Marcus had discovered that someone was intercepting Derek's calls and emails, preventing normal communication between us. The investigation revealed that call forwarding had been activated on Derek's phone without his knowledge, redirecting incoming messages to a number registered under a false name. His email account showed signs of unauthorized access, with automatic forwarding rules sending copies of all correspondence to an external address. Marcus had traced the interference to someone with access to both Derek's communication accounts and mine, suggesting that our relationship was being sabotaged by someone close enough to both of us to obtain personal information and passwords. The investigation had also uncovered disturbing information about Madison's background and recent activities in Europe. Derek wrote that Marcus had discovered Madison wasn't a successful model, but rather a sophisticated con artist wanted by authorities in 3 countries for identity theft fraud and relationship scams targeting wealthy men. Madison had been using various aliases to establish romantic relationships with businessmen and investors, gaining access to their finances before disappearing with substantial amounts of money. Madison's European career involved systematically defrauding men who believed they were in genuine relationships with a successful model seeking love and stability. She had stolen jewelry, emptied bank accounts, and destroyed several lives before fleeing to avoid prosecution. The 4th revelation concerned Madison's current scheme involving Trevor and our family. According to Marcus's investigation, Madison had researched our family thoroughly before returning to Boston, gathering information about Harold's business connections, Patricia's social priorities, and our family's financial status. She had identified Trevor as her target because of his access to family money and his vulnerability to manipulation. Madison had convinced Trevor that marrying her would provide business opportunities through our family's political connections and social network. She had presented false documents showing our family's wealth and influence, while hiding her own desperate financial situation and criminal background. Trevor was apparently unaware that Madison was using their relationship to establish permanent residence in the United States while gaining access to his family's pharmaceutical company assets. Madison planned to drain whatever resources she could obtain before disappearing again, leaving Trevor to face the legal and financial consequences. The most devastating revelation concerned Madison's systematic destruction of my relationship with Derek. Derek's letter included copies of emails that Madison had sent from my account, rejecting his explanations about his work, accusing him of lying about his feelings, and demanding that he accept our relationship was over. Madison had responded to Derek's attempts at communication with increasingly hostile messages that convinced him I had chosen family money over genuine love. Madison had also sent Derek photographs that appeared to show me celebrating with other men, enjoying expensive dinners and social events while he worked in Chicago. The photographs were actually from old family gatherings and social events, but they were presented in ways that suggested I was moving on with my life while Derek struggled with professional responsibilities. Derek wrote that receiving those messages had broken his heart and convinced him that I was the shallow, materialistic person Madison claimed I had always been beneath my loving exterior. He had stopped attempting communication because he believed I had made my choice clear. The twist that revealed the full scope of Madison's manipulation came in Derek's description of recent threatening messages. Derek explained that someone had been sending anonymous warnings about returning to Boston, suggesting that his presence would create legal troubles for our family and damage Harold's business relationships. The messages claimed that police were investigating Derek's business activities and that his appearance at the wedding would result in arrests and public humiliation. Derek had decided to remain in Chicago until after Madison's wedding to protect our family from whatever scandal Madison claimed was developing around his business activities. He was sacrificing his own happiness to spare the people he hoped would become his family from embarrassment and social damage. But Derek's letter also contained a promise that changed everything. He wrote that Marcus's investigation had uncovered enough evidence to expose Madison's fraud and prove Derek's innocence of any criminal activities. Derek was returning to Boston with federal authorities who were prepared to arrest Madison for identity theft fraud and attempted extortion. Derek's final words expressed his love for me and his hope that we could rebuild our relationship once Madison's lies were exposed, and the truth was revealed to everyone who had been manipulated by her schemes. As I finished reading Derek's letter, I realized that Madison's wedding was about to become the scene of her dramatic downfall. Derek wasn't the criminal fleeing prosecution that Madison had described. He was a successful businessman working with authorities to expose the real criminal who had destroyed our relationship and manipulated our families for her own desperate purposes. But I also realized that I needed to warn Trevor about Madison's deception before he committed his life to someone who was systematically destroying everyone around her. The wedding ceremony was beginning, and I had minutes to decide whether to let Madison's fraud continue or find a way to expose the truth before more innocent people were hurt by her schemes. During the cocktail hour, while Madison posed for photographs and accepted congratulations from guests who believed they were celebrating a legitimate wedding, I found Trevor standing alone on the terrace overlooking Westwood's golf course. His face was pale despite the warm afternoon sun, and he was consuming alcohol at a pace that suggested he was trying to numb some kind of emotional pain or anxiety. Trevor's appearance had deteriorated since the morning. His perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled from nervous fidgeting. His expensive tuxedo was wrinkled from perspiration, and his blue eyes held the haunted expression of someone trapped in circumstances beyond his control. I approached Trevor with Derek's letter hidden in my purse and Marcus's investigation findings fresh in my mind. I needed to understand Trevor's role in Madison's scheme and determine whether he was another victim of her manipulation or a willing participant in whatever fraud was unfolding. Trevor started when I joined him on the terrace, nearly dropping his whiskey as he turned to face me. His reaction suggested he was expecting confrontation or bad news, and his hands shook as he attempted to compose himself for conversation. I began carefully expressing concern about his obvious distress and asking whether he was experiencing normal wedding day nerves or something more serious. Trevor's response revealed the depth of his desperation and the complexity of Madison's manipulation. Trevor broke down immediately, abandoning any pretense of happiness or excitement about his wedding day. He explained that his marriage to Madison wasn't a love story or business opportunity, but rather a desperate attempt to avoid criminal prosecution and family scandal. Trevor had been embezzling money from his family's pharmaceutical company for over 2 years, stealing funds to support a gambling addiction that had spiraled completely out of control. Trevor's theft had started small, borrowing money from company accounts to cover poker losses and betting debts with the intention of replacing the funds when his luck improved. But gambling addiction had destroyed his judgment and self-control, leading him to steal increasingly large amounts to chase losses and satisfy creditors who threatened violence if he didn't pay immediately. By the time Madison contacted him, Trevor had embezzled over $3 million from Ashworth Pharmaceuticals, and company auditors were beginning to notice discrepancies in financial reports. Trevor faced certain criminal charges, family disgrace, and possible physical harm from gambling creditors demanding immediate payment. Madison had presented herself as the solution to all his problems. According to Trevor, Madison had approached him through mutual acquaintances in Boston's social scene, claiming she was seeking a business partnership that would benefit both their families. Madison had researched Trevor's situation thoroughly and knew about his gambling debts and embezzlement activities before their first meeting. Madison had offered Trevor a deal that seemed too good to refuse marry her to establish her permanent resident status in the United States, and she would use her European connections to help him launder the stolen money and establish new identity documents that would allow him to disappear before criminal charges were filed. In exchange for Trevor's cooperation, Madison would provide him with enough money from her own resources to satisfy gambling creditors and disappear to a country without extradition agreements with the United States. Trevor had believed Madison's claims about her European wealth and business connections, not realizing that she was as desperate and criminal as he was. But Trevor's situation had become more complicated as the wedding date approached. First, Trevor discovered that Madison's pregnancy claim was completely fabricated. Madison had convinced Trevor that her pregnancy was the reason for their rushed wedding timeline, claiming that European cultural expectations required marriage before childbirth to protect family honor. She had produced convincing medical documents and had been taking hormone supplements that created physical symptoms resembling early pregnancy. Trevor had agreed to claim paternity and provide financial support for the child as part of their arrangement, believing that fatherhood would provide additional motivation for establishing a stable new life together. But Trevor had discovered Madison's pregnancy test was fake. Her medical documents were forged, and her supposed morning sickness was actually caused by anxiety medication she was taking to manage the stress of maintaining multiple elaborate lies. Madison wasn't pregnant and had never been pregnant. She had been using pregnancy as emotional manipulation to rush Trevor into marriage before he could investigate her background or change his mind about their arrangement. Second, Trevor had learned that Madison's European resources were non-existent. Instead of being a wealthy model with international business connections, Madison was fleeing massive debts and criminal charges across multiple countries. She had no money, no legitimate business relationships, and no ability to help Trevor establish a new identity or escape prosecution. Madison was planning to use Trevor's remaining access to his family's company resources to fund her own escape from creditors and law enforcement. Once she had drained whatever money she could obtain from the Ashworth family, she would disappear and leave Trevor to face criminal charges for both his original embezzlement and any additional theft she convinced him to commit. Third, Trevor had discovered that Madison was planning to abandon him immediately after their wedding ceremony. Trevor had found travel documents in Madison's luggage showing plane tickets to South America and bank account information for countries that didn't cooperate with American law enforcement. Madison had been planning her escape for weeks, using their wedding as a final opportunity to access family resources before disappearing forever. Madison had convinced Trevor that they would flee together after establishing her legal marriage status, but her actual plan involved abandoning Trevor as soon as she had obtained whatever financial benefits the marriage provided. The most devastating revelation came when Trevor explained Madison's threats against his family. Madison had discovered that Trevor's younger sister Emma was studying abroad in Europe, and Madison had used her criminal contacts to locate Emma's residence and daily routines. Madison had threatened to have Emma kidnapped or harmed if Trevor didn't cooperate fully with the wedding ceremony and subsequent financial arrangements. Trevor was trapped between criminal prosecution for embezzlement violence from gambling creditors and Madison's threats against his sister's safety. But the final twist that changed everything came when Trevor revealed his own desperate plan. Trevor explained that he had been working with federal authorities for the past month, providing evidence about Madison's criminal activities and international connections in exchange for reduced charges related to his embezzlement. Federal agents had been investigating Madison's fraud network for several months, and Trevor's cooperation had provided crucial information about her methods, associates, and planned escape routes. Trevor's wedding participation was actually part of a federal sting operation designed to capture Madison and her criminal associates before they could flee the country. Trevor's obvious distress wasn't wedding day nerves, but rather fear that Madison would discover his cooperation with law enforcement before agents could arrest her and neutralize her threats against Emma's safety. As Trevor finished explaining his situation, I realized that Derek's return with federal authorities wasn't coincidence, but rather coordination with an existing investigation that had been building evidence against Madison for months. Trevor's wedding to Madison wasn't just the culmination of her latest fraud attempt. It was going to be the moment when law enforcement finally captured one of America's most sophisticated international con artists. But first, we had to survive the ceremony without Madison discovering that her carefully planned escape was actually leading her into a federal trap. As the wedding ceremony concluded and guests moved to the reception area, I noticed a distinguished man in a dark suit observing the celebration from the edge of the crowd. He seemed to be studying Madison and Trevor with professional interest, rather than social curiosity, and his presence felt significant in ways I couldn't immediately explain. The man approached me during the cocktail service, introducing himself as Marcus Williams, the private investigator Derek had hired to uncover the truth about our communication problems and Madison's background. Marcus carried a leather briefcase and spoke with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing information to clients desperate for answers. Marcus had been monitoring the wedding ceremony while coordinating with federal authorities who were preparing to execute arrest warrants for Madison and several associates involved in her international crime network. He had comprehensive evidence about Madison's activities that would not only vindicate Derek, but also protect other potential victims from her fraud schemes. Marcus led me to a private conference room in Westwood's administrative wing, where he spread documents across a mahogany table like pieces of an elaborate puzzle finally being assembled into a complete picture. The investigation had begun 3 weeks earlier when Derek became concerned about the sudden breakdown in our communication and the strange messages he was receiving from someone claiming to be me. Derek had hired Marcus to determine whether technical problems or deliberate interference was preventing normal contact between us. Marcus had quickly discovered that sophisticated communication sabotage was occurring involving illegal access to phone and email accounts belonging to both Derek and me. The interference showed patterns consistent with organized fraud operations rather than simple technical failures or coincidental problems. The investigation had expanded when Marcus found connections between the communication sabotage and a series of international fraud cases involving a woman matching Madison's description and behavioral patterns. Marcus presented a comprehensive file documenting Madison's activities across 3 continents over the past 5 years. Madison's real name was Madison Hartwell, and she was wanted by law enforcement agencies in the United States, France, Italy, and Switzerland for identity theft, marriage fraud, and systematic financial crimes targeting wealthy individuals and families. Madison's criminal career had begun in college, where she was expelled from Northwestern University for stealing classmates' identities and using their credit accounts for expensive purchases. Instead of facing prosecution, Madison had fled to Europe using false documentation obtained through criminal contacts she had developed while working part-time for a document forgery operation. In Europe, Madison had perfected a sophisticated romance scam that involved researching wealthy men through social media and business publications, then establishing contact through carefully crafted fake profiles on dating websites and social networking platforms. Madison would present herself as a successful model or businesswoman, experiencing temporary financial difficulties due to international banking problems or delayed contracts. She would establish romantic relationships with her targets, gradually gaining access to their financial accounts, credit cards, and valuable possessions before disappearing with whatever resources she could obtain. The investigation revealed at least 12 confirmed victims across 4 countries with financial losses totaling over $2 million. Madison's victims included a pharmaceutical executive in Basel, Switzerland, who lost $800,000 and his family's vacation property. A technology entrepreneur in Milan had been defrauded of his startup company's seed funding after Madison convinced him to transfer money for a fake business opportunity she claimed to have arranged through her modeling contacts. In Paris, Madison had systematically stolen jewelry, art, and cash from 3 different men who believed they were in serious relationships with her. She had convinced them to provide her with access to safety deposit boxes and home security systems, then disappeared after emptying their most valuable possessions. The pattern was always the same. Madison would establish trust through emotional manipulation, gain access to financial resources through false emergency situations, then disappear before her victims realized they had been systematically robbed. But Madison's American operation represented the most sophisticated scheme she had ever attempted. Marcus explained that Madison had spent months researching our family's background, business connections, and financial status before returning to Boston. She had identified multiple targets within our social circle and had developed elaborate plans for exploiting various wealthy families simultaneously. Trevor was Madison's primary target because his access to his family's pharmaceutical company provided opportunities for large-scale financial theft. But Madison had also been cultivating relationships with other wealthy young men in Boston, planning to execute multiple fraud schemes before fleeing the country with millions of dollars. Marcus had discovered evidence that Madison was working with a network of international criminals who provided her with forged documents, false identity credentials, and money laundering services in exchange for portions of her theft proceeds. The network included document forgers in Eastern Europe, banking officials in offshore financial centers, and criminal organizations that specialized in helping wealthy criminals establish new identities and disappear from law enforcement. Madison's wedding to Trevor was designed to be the culmination of her American operations, providing her with legal marriage status that would complicate extradition proceedings while giving her access to Ashworth Pharmaceuticals' resources for final theft before disappearing. But the investigation had also uncovered Madison's systematic destruction of my relationship with Derek. Marcus presented detailed evidence showing how Madison had gained unauthorized access to Derek's, and my communication accounts intercepted our messages and sent false communications designed to convince both of us that the other person had lost interest in continuing our relationship. Madison had been monitoring Derek's business activities for months, gathering information about his inheritance and professional responsibilities that she used to create believable stories about his criminal activities and financial problems. She had also been manipulating our parents by providing them with false evidence about Derek's background while presenting herself as the concerned sister trying to protect me from making a terrible mistake. The most disturbing revelation concerned Madison's use of prescription drugs to manipulate Patricia's mental state and decision-making abilities. Marcus had obtained medical records showing that Patricia's recent health problems and memory confusion were caused by mercury poisoning from contaminated vitamin supplements Madison had been providing. The poisoning was causing neurological symptoms that made Patricia more susceptible to Madison's emotional manipulation while undermining her ability to think clearly about family decisions. Madison had been slowly poisoning our mother to ensure her compliance with plans that served Madison's criminal purposes rather than the family's genuine interests. The evidence also revealed Madison's plans for destroying other family relationships if necessary to protect her schemes. Madison had compiled detailed information about Harold's business clients and political connections, preparing to use blackmail and false accusations to prevent him from interfering with her activities if he became suspicious about her background or intentions. She had also gathered compromising information about family friends and social contacts, planning to use their secrets as leverage to maintain her position within Boston's wealthy social circles. But Marcus's investigation had provided law enforcement with everything needed to arrest Madison and dismantle her entire criminal network. The twist that would change everything came when Marcus revealed that federal agents were already positioned throughout the wedding reception, waiting for the optimal moment to execute arrest warrants for Madison and several associates who had been monitoring the ceremony. Derek was coordinating with federal authorities from Chicago, providing additional evidence about Madison's attempts to sabotage interstate business communications and interfere with legitimate commercial activities. The wedding reception wasn't just Madison's moment of triumph. It was going to be the scene where she was finally captured for crimes that had destroyed lives across 2 continents. But first, Madison would experience the complete exposure of her lies in front of 300 witnesses who represented the social and business elite she had been trying so desperately to infiltrate and exploit. While federal agents positioned themselves throughout the reception and Marcus coordinated with law enforcement officials, I made a discovery that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our family's history and Madison's place within it. Patricia approached me during the dinner service, moving unsteadily despite her medication and looking confused about the wedding celebration happening around us. Her condition had been deteriorating for months, and I now understood that Madison's systematic poisoning was responsible for her neurological symptoms and memory problems. Patricia pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the reception hall, speaking in the whispered tone she used when sharing family secrets or expressing concerns about social appearances. Her words came in disconnected fragments, but together they revealed a truth that explained Madison's desperate behavior and her intimate knowledge of our family's vulnerabilities. Patricia began by apologizing for decisions she had made 21 years ago, choices that had seemed necessary at the time but had created complications she was only now beginning to understand. Her confused state made the conversation difficult to follow, but certain phrases cut through the confusion with devastating clarity. Madison wasn't my biological sister. Patricia explained that Madison had been adopted illegally when I was 5 years old through arrangements Harold had made with business associates who specialized in providing wealthy families with children who couldn't be obtained through legitimate adoption agencies. Harold had wanted a second daughter to complement our family's social image, but Patricia's medical complications had prevented additional pregnancies. Instead of pursuing legal adoption through established agencies, Harold had used his political connections to arrange for a private transaction that would provide them with a beautiful daughter while avoiding extensive background checks and waiting periods. Madison had been obtained from a family situation that involved criminal activities and legal complications that made legitimate adoption impossible. Harold's associates had promised that Madison's background would never create problems for our family, but they had failed to properly investigate the circumstances surrounding her availability for adoption. Patricia revealed that Madison's biological parents had been involved in international fraud operations similar to the schemes Madison was currently executing. Madison's criminal behavior wasn't learned from external influences, but rather inherited from parents who had specialized in sophisticated deception and financial manipulation. Harold had hidden Madison's adoption from extended family and social contacts, creating false documentation that established Madison as Patricia's biological daughter. The deception had been so complete that most family friends believed Patricia had given birth to Madison during a private medical retreat in Switzerland. But Madison had discovered the truth about her adoption 5 years ago when she gained access to Harold's private files while home from college. Patricia's revelation explained Madison's systematic campaign to destroy my relationships and opportunities while positioning herself as the family's preferred daughter. Madison had spent years researching her biological parents' criminal activities and had begun implementing similar fraud schemes as a way of claiming what she believed was her inheritance from both families. She felt entitled to our family's wealth because of the money Harold had paid for her adoption, and she felt justified in using criminal methods because they represented her biological heritage. Madison had been methodically eliminating my advantages within the family while building evidence against Harold that could be used for blackmail if he ever attempted to expose her adoption or limit her access to family resources. The most disturbing aspect of Patricia's confession concerned Madison's long-term plans for our family. Madison had been slowly poisoning Patricia not only to influence her decision-making, but also to accelerate her inheritance timeline. Madison was planning to inherit Patricia's jewelry art collection and financial accounts by ensuring Patricia's death appeared to be the result of natural age-related decline rather than deliberate murder. Madison had also been gathering evidence about Harold's illegal adoption arrangement, planning to use it as blackmail to force him to transfer family assets to her control before the statute of limitations expired on his criminal liability. Patricia's medical records showed systematic mercury exposure over the past 2 years, beginning shortly after Madison's return from her failed European modeling career. The poisoning was designed to create gradual neurological deterioration that would make Patricia dependent on Madison for daily care while undermining her ability to make informed decisions about finances or medical treatment. But Patricia's confession also revealed information that would be crucial for federal authorities building cases against Madison's criminal network. Patricia had documentation showing Harold's payments for Madison's adoption, including records of money transfers to offshore accounts and communications with criminal organizations that specialized in child trafficking and illegal adoption schemes. The documentation would provide federal investigators with evidence connecting Madison's current activities to an international criminal network that had been operating for decades across multiple countries and criminal enterprises. Harold's unknowing involvement in child trafficking operations would create serious legal complications for him, but it would also provide prosecutors with leverage to obtain his cooperation in building cases against the criminals who had sold Madison to our family. The twist that changed everything came when Patricia revealed Madison's ultimate plan for revenge against both families. Madison had been planning to expose Harold's illegal adoption activities to federal authorities after securing her inheritance from Patricia's death, destroying Harold's political career and social standing while positioning herself as the innocent victim of his criminal behavior. Madison would use the scandal to claim that she had been trafficked as a child and was entitled to financial compensation from our family's estate. She would present herself as someone who had been forced into criminal activities by the trauma of being sold into illegal adoption, gaining public sympathy while avoiding prosecution for her own crimes. Madison had also been planning to expose her biological parents' criminal activities to European authorities, claiming she had been gathering evidence to help law enforcement while actually using the information to identify and rob her parents' former victims who still possessed valuable assets. Patricia's revelation meant that Madison's criminal behavior was even more sophisticated and far-reaching than Marcus's investigation had discovered. But it also meant that federal authorities had additional evidence and legal strategies available for ensuring Madison couldn't escape prosecution or disappear before facing consequences for decades of criminal activities. As Patricia finished her confused confession, I realized that tonight's arrest wouldn't just capture Madison for her recent fraud attempts. It would expose an international criminal conspiracy that had been operating for decades using illegal adoption, child trafficking, and systematic fraud to destroy families across multiple countries. Madison's wedding was about to become the scene where law enforcement finally dismantled a criminal network that had been ruining lives for longer than Madison had been alive. But first, I needed to ensure Patricia received immediate medical treatment for mercury poisoning, and that Harold understood the full scope of legal jeopardy he faced because of decisions he had made 21 years ago. The family history I thought I understood had been built on lies and criminal activities that were finally about to be exposed to everyone who had been manipulated by Madison's elaborate deceptions. The reception had reached its peak celebration when the ballroom doors opened with dramatic authority, silencing conversations and drawing every guest's attention to the unexpected arrival that would change everything. Derek strode into the room like a man on a mission, wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that commanded respect and accompanied by 3 individuals whose professional bearing immediately suggested law enforcement. Derek's presence transformed the atmosphere from festive celebration to tense anticipation, He moved with confident purpose across the polished marble floor, his dark eyes scanning the crowd, until they found Madison at the head table where she sat frozen in her stolen wedding dress, with growing recognition that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Special Agent Sarah Chen of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped forward, her credentials displayed prominently as she addressed the assembled guests with calm authority. Agent Chen explained that federal warrants had been issued for Madison Hartwell's arrest on charges including interstate fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit organized criminal activities across international boundaries. Agent Chen's announcement sent shockwaves through the reception as Boston's social and political elite realized they were witnessing the arrest of someone they had just celebrated as a member of one of their most respected families. Derek requested permission to address the guests before Madison was taken into custody, his voice carrying the strength of someone who had endured weeks of manipulation and lies but had emerged with truth and justice on his side. Derek began by apologizing to everyone present for disrupting what they believed was a legitimate wedding celebration, explaining that recent discoveries about Madison's background and criminal activities had made immediate action necessary to protect additional potential victims from her fraud schemes. He revealed the truth about his own background and the systematic deception Madison had used to destroy his relationship with me. Derek explained that he was the owner and chief executive officer of Morrison Development Group, having inherited the company from his grandfather 18 months earlier. Morrison Development Group was one of New England's most successful construction and development companies, with current projects valued at over $200 million and a reputation for integrity that had been built over 3 generations. Derek's recent absence wasn't abandonment or flight from criminal prosecution as Madison had claimed, but rather supervision of Morrison Development Group's largest contract in company history, the redevelopment of 12 city blocks in downtown Chicago into a mixed-use complex featuring luxury residential, commercial, and retail spaces. The Chicago project represented a $450 million investment that would establish Morrison Development Group as one of America's premier urban development companies. Derek's role as project director required his presence in Chicago for several crucial weeks while environmental clearances, zoning approvals, and construction financing were finalized. Derek had attempted to maintain communication with me throughout his Chicago assignment, but Madison's systematic interference with our phone and email accounts had prevented normal contact between us. Madison had been intercepting Derek's messages and sending responses designed to convince him that I had rejected our relationship in favor of family wealth and social expectations. Derek presented evidence showing how Madison had gained unauthorized access to both his communication accounts and mine using illegally obtained passwords and personal information to monitor our correspondence and send false messages that destroyed trust between us. Marcus Williams, Derek's private investigator, provided additional documentation showing Madison's elaborate scheme to manipulate our family's perceptions of Derek's character and financial situation, while positioning herself as a concerned sister, protecting me from making a devastating mistake. But Derek's most dramatic revelation concerned the true scope of Morrison Development Group's success and his personal wealth. Derek announced that Morrison Development Group had just completed negotiations for the largest commercial development deal in Chicago's history, a partnership with international investors that would transform Morrison Development Group into a billion-dollar enterprise within 5 years. Derek's personal net worth exceeded $40 million, making Harold and Patricia's concerns about financial security and social status completely irrelevant to our relationship. Derek could provide me with financial advantages that surpassed anything our family's wealth could offer, while also giving me genuine love and partnership that Madison's manipulative schemes had tried to destroy. The revelation stunned the wedding guests, many of whom recognized Derek's company as responsible for several prestigious development projects throughout Boston, and knew that Morrison Development Group contracts were highly sought after by the region's wealthiest investors. Patricia gasped audibly as she realized how thoroughly Madison had deceived the family about Derek's background and prospects. Harold's face went pale as he understood that his rejection of Derek represented one of the worst business and social mistakes he had ever made. But Derek's presentation also included evidence about Madison's criminal background and the international fraud network she had been operating while living in our family's home. Derek revealed that federal authorities had been investigating Madison for months as part of a larger probe into international romance fraud operations targeting wealthy Americans. Madison was connected to criminal organizations across 3 continents that specialized in identity theft relationship scams and systematic financial fraud. Madison had been using our family's home as her base of operations while planning multiple fraud schemes involving other wealthy Boston families. Our family's social connections and Harold's political influence provided Madison with access to potential victims she could never have reached through other methods. Derek explained that Madison's pregnancy claim was completely fabricated. Her modeling career in Europe was fictional, and her relationship with Trevor was based entirely on criminal exploitation of his gambling addiction and embezzlement activities. The evidence Derek presented included financial records showing Madison's debts to European creditors, documentation of her involvement in previous fraud schemes, and communications between Madison and criminal associates planning additional operations in Boston and other American cities. But Derek's most personal revelation concerned his feelings for me and his determination to rebuild our relationship despite Madison's attempts to destroy it. Derek publicly declared that his love for me had never wavered, even when Madison's manipulation convinced him that I had chosen family money over genuine affection. He explained that discovering the truth about Madison's interference had been both devastating and liberating, proving that our relationship was genuine while exposing the criminal behavior that had nearly destroyed our happiness. Derek formally proposed to me again, this time in front of 300 witnesses who could see the authentic emotion and commitment in his declaration. He presented a custom-designed engagement ring featuring a flawless diamond surrounded by sapphires, explaining that he had commissioned the ring months earlier as a surprise for our original wedding day. Derek's proposal was met with enthusiastic applause from wedding guests who now understood the true story behind the evening's dramatic events. Even Harold and Patricia, despite their shock and embarrassment about being manipulated by Madison, seemed moved by Derek's obvious devotion and impressed by his professional achievements. But the evening's most satisfying moment came when Derek announced the consequences Madison would face for her systematic criminal activities. Federal authorities had obtained evidence supporting charges that could result in Madison serving 20 to 30 years in federal prison, with additional prosecution possible in European countries where she had committed similar crimes. Madison's criminal network was being dismantled simultaneously in multiple countries, ensuring that she couldn't escape prosecution by fleeing to international locations. Derek explained that his cooperation with federal authorities had been crucial in gathering evidence about Madison's communication sabotage and fraud schemes, providing prosecutors with documentation needed to obtain convictions and recover money for previous victims of her criminal activities. Madison's attempt to steal our wedding and destroy our relationship had led directly to her capture and the exposure of criminal activities that had been harming innocent people for years. As Derek concluded his presentation, federal agents approached Madison to execute her arrest warrant. Madison's transformation from confident bride to captured criminal provided a dramatic conclusion to the most sophisticated deception any of the wedding guests had ever witnessed. But for Derek and me, Madison's arrest represented the beginning of our real love story, freed from manipulation and built on truth, trust, and genuine partnership. As federal agents approached her table with handcuffs ready, Madison's composure finally cracked, revealing the calculating criminal mind behind her beautiful facade. But instead of accepting defeat, Madison launched a desperate counterattack designed to destroy me and salvage whatever advantage she could from the collapse of her elaborate schemes. Madison rose from her chair with theatrical drama, her stolen wedding dress flowing around her like the costume of a performer delivering her final, most important scene. She addressed the crowd of stunned wedding guests with the same manipulative charm she had used to deceive our family, but now her words carried the venom of someone whose carefully constructed world was disintegrating. Madison's first strategy involved painting herself as the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by Derek and me to destroy her happiness and steal her legitimate place within our family. Madison claimed that Derek's evidence was fabricated and that his cooperation with federal authorities represented revenge against our family for rejecting his advances toward me. She suggested that Derek had manufactured criminal allegations against her because he couldn't accept that I had chosen family loyalty over romantic attachment to someone beneath our social status. Madison presented Derek's wealth and business success as proof that he was sophisticated enough to create convincing false evidence and manipulate federal investigations for personal gain. She argued that Derek's resources and connections had allowed him to frame her for crimes she never committed while portraying himself as an innocent victim of her supposed schemes. Madison's second strategy involved claiming that I had been working with Derek to eliminate her from the family inheritance and social position. Madison told the assembled guests that I had always resented her beauty and success, and that discovering Derek's wealth had provided me with an opportunity to remove her from competition for family resources and social advantages. She claimed that Derek and I had been plotting for months to destroy her European career and force her return to Boston, where we could manipulate her into a vulnerable position. Madison produced what appeared to be email communications between Derek and me discussing strategies for exposing her supposed criminal activities and ensuring she faced prosecution that would remove her permanently from our family's social circle. The emails seemed to show me expressing jealousy about Madison's modeling career and Derek's eagerness to help me eliminate a rival for family wealth and status. Madison presented these communications as evidence that the federal investigation was actually a personal vendetta disguised as legitimate law enforcement activity. Madison's third strategy involved exploiting Patricia's weakened mental state to create confusion about the family's real history and her legitimate place within it. Madison approached Patricia, who was still struggling with the neurological effects of mercury poisoning, and began manipulating her memories about Madison's childhood and adoption circumstances. Madison convinced Patricia to tell the wedding guests that the adoption story was a delusion caused by her recent medical problems, and that Madison was Patricia's biological daughter who deserved protection from false accusations. Patricia, confused and frightened by the chaos surrounding her, began supporting Madison's version of events and expressing concern that Derek and I were trying to destroy her daughter's happiness through criminal conspiracy and false evidence. Madison used Patricia's apparent support to claim that the entire family history of illegal adoption was fabricated by Derek's investigation team to create leverage against Harold and justify federal charges that had no basis in reality. Madison's fourth strategy involved threatening to expose supposed criminal activities by Harold and other family members if the federal charges against her weren't withdrawn immediately. Madison claimed that her research into our family's background had revealed extensive tax evasion, political corruption, and business fraud involving Harold's consulting firm and our family's investment activities. She threatened to provide federal authorities with evidence about these alleged crimes unless the charges against her were dropped and she was allowed to leave the country peacefully. Madison suggested that prosecuting her would result in a comprehensive investigation of our family's finances and business relationships that would destroy Harold's political career and result in criminal charges against multiple family members. Madison's threats seemed designed to convince Harold that protecting her from prosecution was necessary to preserve the family's reputation and avoid legal consequences for his own supposed criminal activities. But Madison's most desperate strategy involved claiming that Derek was actually the criminal mastermind behind an elaborate long-term scheme to infiltrate and exploit wealthy Boston families. Madison told the wedding guests that Derek's construction company was a front for organized criminal activities involving money laundering fraud and systematic exploitation of wealthy clients who trusted him with access to their homes and financial information. Madison claimed that Derek had been using his legitimate business relationships to gather intelligence about wealthy families, then orchestrating elaborate schemes to gain access to their resources through romantic manipulation and false business partnerships. According to Madison's accusations, Derek's relationship with me was part of a larger criminal operation designed to infiltrate Boston's social elite and steal millions of dollars through sophisticated fraud schemes involving multiple wealthy families. Madison presented Derek's cooperation with federal authorities as evidence that he was actually providing information about other criminal activities to deflect attention from his own illegal enterprises and secure immunity from prosecution for his crimes. But Madison's counterattack began to unravel when Trevor, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, publicly contradicted her claims about their relationship and her supposed innocence. Trevor stood up from his position at the head table, his face pale but his voice clear as he addressed the wedding guests with the truth about Madison's manipulation and criminal activities. Trevor confirmed that Madison had approached him with a criminal proposal involving marriage fraud, money laundering, and systematic theft from his family's pharmaceutical company. He admitted his own involvement in embezzlement activities, but explained that Madison had been blackmailing him with threats against his sister's safety to ensure his cooperation with her schemes. Trevor's confession demolished Madison's claims about her innocence and confirmed federal authorities' evidence about her criminal activities and methods. But Trevor's revelation also exposed the most dangerous aspect of Madison's desperation: her willingness to harm the innocent people to protect herself from prosecution. Trevor warned federal agents that Madison had been working with international criminal associates who specialized in kidnapping and violence, and that her threats against his sister Emma represented genuine danger rather than empty intimidation. Madison's criminal network included people who would resort to extreme measures to protect their operations from law enforcement interference, and Madison's arrest could trigger retaliation against family members of people who had cooperated with authorities. As Trevor finished his confession, Madison made one final desperate attempt to escape justice by revealing information that would put our entire family in immediate danger from her criminal associates. Madison announced that she had been providing our family's personal information, daily routines, and security arrangements to criminal organizations that specialized in kidnapping wealthy Americans for ransom payments. Madison claimed that arresting her would result in our family being targeted for violence by criminals who expected her to provide them with continued access to potential victims among Boston's wealthy social circles. But Madison's final threat backfired by providing federal authorities with additional evidence about her criminal network and confirming the necessity of her immediate arrest before she could warn her associates about the law enforcement operation. Agent Chen announced that Madison's threats would result in additional federal charges and that protective custody would be arranged for family members who might face retaliation from Madison's criminal associates. Madison's desperate counterattack had not only failed to prevent her arrest, but had also provided federal prosecutors with additional evidence about her criminal activities and the dangerous international network she had been operating within our community. As Madison's desperate counterattack crumbled under scrutiny, Agent Chen signaled to her team, and the ballroom transformed into a command center for one of the most comprehensive criminal evidence presentations Boston society had ever witnessed. Federal agents began systematically displaying the overwhelming proof of Madison's guilt while dismantling every lie she had constructed during her campaign of deception. Marcus Williams approached the microphone with the comprehensive investigative file that would serve as the foundation for Madison's prosecution and vindicate everyone she had manipulated with her elaborate schemes. Marcus began by presenting digital evidence that proved Madison's systematic sabotage of Derek's and my communications over the past 3 months. The investigation had recovered deleted emails, text messages, and voicemails that showed Madison's complete control over our ability to communicate with each other. Phone records demonstrated that Madison had been using specialized software to intercept and redirect our calls, while email logs revealed unauthorized access to both our accounts from devices registered under false names Madison had been using. Marcus displayed recorded conversations between Madison and criminal associates, discussing strategies for destroying our relationship while maintaining her position within our family's social and financial hierarchy. The recordings revealed Madison's cold calculation as she described manipulating our parents' emotions, creating false evidence about Derek's background, and planning the theft of our wedding arrangements as the culmination of her scheme to replace me as the family's preferred daughter. Marcus presented financial records showing Madison's systematic theft from our family during her residence in our home. Madison had been using Patricia's credit cards and bank accounts to fund her lifestyle while claiming to be financially independent from her European modeling career. She had stolen jewelry artwork and personal items from our home, selling them through criminal networks to pay her debts to European creditors. The financial evidence showed Madison had embezzled over $150,000 from our family's accounts during the past 6 months, using forged signatures and unauthorized electronic transfers to access funds Patricia and Harold believed were secure. But the most damning evidence concerned Madison's systematic poisoning of Patricia to facilitate her manipulation and theft. Marcus presented medical records showing Patricia's mercury exposure levels along with laboratory analysis of the vitamin supplements Madison had been providing. The supplements contained mercury compounds specifically designed to cause gradual neurological damage while making the poisoning appear to be natural age-related decline. Marcus had also discovered Madison's research into inheritance laws and estate planning, revealing her intention to accelerate Patricia's death while positioning herself as the primary beneficiary of Patricia's assets. The evidence showed Madison had been consulting with criminal associates who specialized in inheritance fraud planning to contest Patricia's will and claim the majority of her estate based on false claims about Patricia's mental incompetence and my supposed manipulation of family finances. Janet Peterson, the venue manager, provided crucial testimony about Derek's legitimate business activities and Madison's attempts to sabotage our wedding arrangements. Janet presented security footage showing Madison's unauthorized access to Westwood's private offices, where she had been copying client information and financial records for use in targeting other wealthy families who held events at the country club. Madison had been using her access to our wedding planning as an opportunity to identify and research potential victims for future fraud schemes involving other Boston families. Janet's testimony also confirmed Derek's genuine excitement about our wedding and his investments in creating a perfect celebration, contradicting Madison's claims about his supposed abandonment and criminal activities. Federal agents presented evidence about Madison's international criminal network and her role in orchestrating fraud schemes across multiple countries. Agent Chen revealed that Madison was connected to organized criminal enterprises in France, Italy, Switzerland, and Eastern European countries that specialized in romance fraud, identity theft, and money laundering operations, targeting wealthy individuals and families. Madison had been trained by professional criminals who taught her sophisticated techniques for establishing false identities, manipulating wealthy targets, and laundering stolen money through international banking networks designed to avoid law enforcement detection. The evidence showed Madison had been responsible for stealing over $3 million from victims across 4 countries, with plans to expand her operations throughout the United States, using our family's social connections as entry points to additional wealthy targets. But the most shocking revelation concerned Madison's biological parents and the criminal conspiracy that had brought her into our family. Agent Chen presented documentation showing that Madison's adoption had been orchestrated by an international child trafficking organization that specialized in placing criminal children with wealthy families for long-term exploitation schemes. Madison's biological parents, Victor and Anya Petrov, were professional criminals who had been selling their children to wealthy American families as part of elaborate long-term fraud operations designed to steal family wealth over decades, rather than through quick theft schemes. The Petrovs had trained Madison from childhood to manipulate wealthy families, steal their resources, and provide information about their social networks that could be used to identify additional targets for criminal exploitation. Madison's criminal behavior wasn't the result of trauma or poor influences, but rather the implementation of training she had received from birth as part of an organized criminal conspiracy spanning multiple generations and countries. Harold's illegal adoption of Madison had unknowingly brought a professional criminal into our family, someone specifically trained to destroy us from within, while advancing her biological parents' criminal enterprises. Agent Chen revealed that the Petrovs were currently in federal custody, facing charges related to child trafficking, organized fraud operations, and conspiracy to commit crimes across international boundaries. Madison's arrest was part of a coordinated international law enforcement operation designed to dismantle the entire criminal network that had been operating for over 20 years across multiple countries and criminal enterprises. But the evidence presentation's most dramatic moment came when federal agents displayed recordings of Madison's recent communications with her criminal associates, planning additional crimes that would have devastated our family and numerous other innocent victims. The recordings revealed Madison's plans to kidnap Patricia for ransom after establishing legal guardianship through forged documents claiming Patricia was mentally incompetent due to age-related dementia. Madison had been planning to murder Patricia after collecting ransom payments, then claim inheritance rights as Patricia's legal guardian, while presenting her death as the tragic result of Alzheimer's disease and family stress. The recordings also revealed Madison's plans to frame Derek for financial crimes related to his construction business, destroying his reputation and business relationships, while eliminating him as a potential threat to her operations within our family. Madison had been working with criminal associates who specialize in planting false evidence and manipulating government investigations to destroy innocent people who interfered with their fraud operations. As the evidence presentation concluded, it became clear that Madison's criminal activities were far more extensive and dangerous than anyone had imagined. Madison wasn't simply a con artist seeking quick financial gain, but rather a professional criminal trained from childhood to destroy families and steal their resources as part of sophisticated long-term operations designed to finance international criminal enterprises. Her arrest represented not only justice for her direct victims, but also the disruption of criminal operations that had been devastating innocent families for decades. Agent Chen announced that Madison would face federal charges carrying potential sentences totaling over 60 years in prison, with additional prosecution likely in multiple international jurisdictions, where her criminal network had operated. The evidence against Madison was overwhelming, comprehensive, and completely devastating to any hope she might have had for avoiding conviction and lengthy imprisonment. But for our family, the evidence presentation provided vindication closure and the foundation for rebuilding relationships that had been nearly destroyed by Madison's systematic manipulation and lies. The moment Agent Chen finished presenting the overwhelming evidence against Madison federal agents, moved with swift precision to execute the arrest warrant that would finally bring justice for crimes spanning multiple countries and numerous innocent victims. Agent Chen approached Madison, who stood frozen in her stolen wedding dress like a beautiful statue whose facade was finally cracking to reveal the rot beneath. The agent read Madison her constitutional rights, while 300 wedding guests watched in stunned silence as Boston society witnessed the dramatic conclusion to one of the most sophisticated criminal deceptions in the city's history. Madison's arrest at the altar, wearing my custom-designed Vera Wang gown while surrounded by white peonies and blush roses she had stolen from my dreams, provided a poetic justice that satisfied something deep in my soul that had been wounded by her systematic cruelty and manipulation. As handcuffs clicked around Madison's wrists, her mask of beauty and charm finally slipped, completely revealing the cold calculation and vicious anger that had always lurked beneath her carefully constructed persona. Madison's final words before being led away were directed at me with pure venom, promising that her criminal associates would make our family pay for her arrest, and that her imprisonment would only be the beginning of our suffering. But Madison's threats felt hollow and desperate, the last gasps of someone whose elaborate schemes had been completely exposed and dismantled by law enforcement professionals who understood her criminal methods better than she realized. Agent Chen assured our family that protective measures were already in place to guard against retaliation from Madison's criminal network, and that international law enforcement agencies were simultaneously arresting her associates across multiple countries. As Madison was escorted from the ballroom, Derek approached me with the custom engagement ring he had commissioned months earlier, a stunning creation featuring a flawless 3-carat diamond surrounded by sapphires that caught the ballroom's crystal chandelier light like captured stars. Derek's proposal, delivered in front of 300 witnesses who had just learned the truth about our relationship and his genuine character, felt like the most romantic moment of my entire life. Derek spoke with quiet intensity about his love for me, his commitment to building a life together based on truth and mutual respect, and his determination to create the happiness that Madison had tried so desperately to destroy. Derek's words were heartfelt and genuine, expressing emotions that had been tested by weeks of manipulation and lies, but had emerged stronger and more certain than ever before. The wedding guests erupted in enthusiastic applause as I accepted Derek's proposal, their cheers reflecting not only celebration of our engagement, but also relief that justice had prevailed over criminal deception and that genuine love had survived Madison's attempts at destruction. Harold and Patricia approached us together, their faces showing embarrassment about their manipulation by Madison, but also genuine joy about Derek's character and our obvious happiness together. Patricia, despite her ongoing medical treatment for mercury poisoning, seemed clearer and more focused than she had been in months, as if Madison's removal from our home had already begun, lifting the fog that had clouded her judgment and decision-making abilities. Patricia apologized tearfully for doubting Derek's integrity and for allowing Madison's lies to influence her perception of our relationship. She expressed gratitude that Derek's investigation had exposed Madison's criminal activities before further damage could be done to our family or other innocent victims. Harold's apology was more formal but equally sincere, acknowledging that his rejection of Derek had been based on false information and poor judgment rather than legitimate concerns about Derek's character or prospects. Harold expressed genuine admiration for Derek's business achievements and professional reputation, admitting that Derek's success and integrity exceeded anything Harold had expected from potential sons-in-law. But Harold's most significant gesture came when he publicly announced his support for our engagement and his intention to welcome Derek into the family with the respect and acceptance that had been unfairly withheld during Madison's campaign of deception. Harold's endorsement carried weight within Boston's social and business communities, providing Derek with immediate acceptance among influential families who valued Harold's judgment about character and professional achievement. The evening's most satisfying moment came when Derek revealed the additional support he had arranged for our family's recovery from Madison's criminal activities. Derek announced that Morrison Development Group would provide full financial compensation for any losses our family had suffered due to Madison's theft and fraud, ensuring that Patricia's medical care and family financial security would not be compromised by Madison's criminal activities. Derek had also arranged for the country club to donate the evening's entire wedding reception to charity, transforming Madison's stolen celebration into a fundraising event benefiting organizations that helped victims of fraud and financial crimes. The wedding guests, inspired by Derek's generosity and our family's survival of Madison's criminal scheme, contributed over $200,000 to support fraud victims and law enforcement efforts to combat international criminal networks. But Derek's most meaningful gift was the promise that our real wedding would take place within 6 months, planned together without interference or manipulation, celebrating genuine love and commitment in the presence of family and friends who supported our happiness. Derek revealed that he had been working with wedding planners in the Hamptons to create a celebration that would surpass anything we had originally envisioned taking place at his family's private estate, with luxury accommodations for guests and personalized touches that reflected our shared dreams and values. Our real wedding would represent not only our commitment to each other, but also our triumph over criminal deception and our determination to build a life based on truth, trust, and mutual support. As the evening concluded with Madison in federal custody and our engagement celebrated by Boston's social elite, I felt profound gratitude for Derek's persistence in discovering the truth, and for the courage of law enforcement officials who had worked tirelessly to expose Madison's criminal network. But I also felt deep satisfaction knowing that Madison's attempt to steal my happiness had ultimately led to her own destruction and to the protection of future victims who might have suffered from her continued criminal activities. Justice had been served not only for our family, but also for numerous other innocent people whose lives had been damaged by Madison's systematic fraud and manipulation. Trevor, free from Madison's blackmail and threats against his sister Emma, agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges related to his embezzlement activities. Trevor's cooperation would provide additional evidence needed to convict Madison and her associates, while ensuring that Emma remained safe from retaliation by criminal organizations. Agent Chen confirmed that Emma had been located safely in London and was being provided with protection by international law enforcement agencies until Madison's criminal network could be completely dismantled. Trevor's relief at his sister's safety and his freedom from Madison's manipulation was obvious as he thanked Derek and federal agents for their efforts to protect innocent family members who had been threatened by Madison's criminal activities. As guests departed from what had become one of Boston's most memorable social events, everyone understood they had witnessed something extraordinary: the dramatic exposure of sophisticated criminal deception and the triumph of genuine love over elaborate manipulation. Derek and I had not only survived Madison's attempt to destroy our relationship, but had emerged with deeper appreciation for each other's character and stronger commitment to building a life together based on honesty and mutual support. 6 months after Madison's arrest at the altar of her stolen wedding, The consequences of her criminal activities had rippled through multiple countries as international law enforcement agencies worked together to dismantle the sophisticated fraud network that had been operating for decades under various identities and schemes. Madison faced 23 federal charges in the United States, including interstate fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy to commit organized criminal activities, attempted murder through systematic poisoning, and participation in international child trafficking operations. The evidence against Madison was so comprehensive that her defense attorneys advised accepting a plea agreement rather than risking trial, where additional evidence would likely result in even harsher sentencing recommendations from prosecutors. Madison ultimately received a 25-year federal prison sentence without possibility of parole, ensuring she would remain incarcerated well into her 50s and would never again have the opportunity to manipulate and destroy innocent families. Additional charges were pending in France, Italy, and Switzerland, where Madison's previous victims had provided testimony about her systematic theft and fraud activities during her supposed modeling career in Europe. European authorities indicated that Madison would face additional prosecution and imprisonment in their jurisdictions after completing her American sentence, essentially ensuring she would spend the remainder of her life in various prison systems. But Madison's conviction also led to the exposure and prosecution of her biological parents and the criminal network that had been using adopted children to infiltrate and exploit wealthy families across multiple countries. Victor and Anya Petrov received life sentences for their leadership roles in international child trafficking and organized fraud operations that had victimized hundreds of families over 2 decades of criminal activities. Federal investigations revealed that the Petrovs had been responsible for placing over 50 criminal children with wealthy American families using long-term manipulation schemes to steal millions of dollars while destroying family relationships and social connections that had been built over generations. Harold faced federal investigation regarding his illegal adoption of Madison, but prosecutors ultimately decided against criminal charges due to his cooperation with authorities and his status as a victim of the larger criminal conspiracy. Harold's political consulting firm survived the scandal, though he voluntarily withdrew from several high-profile campaigns and focused on rebuilding his professional reputation through transparent business practices and charitable activities supporting fraud victims. Patricia made a complete recovery from mercury poisoning after months of medical treatment that removed toxic compounds from her system and restored her neurological function to normal levels. Patricia's recovery was remarkable, not only from a medical standpoint, but also emotionally, as she regained the clarity and confidence that had made her such an effective social leader within Boston's elite circles. Patricia threw herself into supporting organizations that helped fraud victims recover from financial and emotional damage, using her social connections and influence to raise awareness about sophisticated criminal schemes targeting wealthy families. But the most meaningful transformation occurred in our family's relationships with each other and our understanding of what truly mattered for happiness and security. Derek and I were married in September at his family's estate in the Hamptons, surrounded by 300 guests who celebrated our triumph over criminal deception and our commitment to building a life together based on genuine love and mutual respect. Our wedding was everything Madison's stolen ceremony had not been: authentic, joyful, and focused on celebrating real love rather than advancing criminal schemes or social manipulation. Derek had spared no expense in creating a celebration that reflected our shared dreams and values, from the oceanfront ceremony to the reception featuring our favorite foods, music, and personal touches that made the day uniquely meaningful for us. The most touching moment came when Patricia presented me with our great-grandmother's emerald ring, which had been recovered from Madison during her arrest and restored to its rightful place in our family's heritage. Patricia's gesture represented not only the return of a valuable family heirloom, but also the restoration of trust and love that Madison had tried to destroy through her systematic manipulation and lies. Harold walked me down the aisle with obvious pride and genuine affection for Derek, their relationship having evolved from suspicious rejection to mutual respect and friendship based on Derek's character and professional achievements. Derek's business empire had continued expanding during the months following Madison's arrest, with Morrison Development Group completing the Chicago project ahead of schedule and under budget, while securing additional contracts worth over $500 million. Derek's success provided us with financial security beyond anything our family's wealth could offer. But more importantly, his integrity and work ethic had earned genuine respect from everyone who worked with him. But our wedding also served as a celebration of justice and recovery for everyone who had been harmed by Madison's criminal activities. Trevor attended our ceremony as a guest rather than a defendant, having successfully completed his cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors and begun rebuilding his life with counseling and legitimate business activities. Trevor's sister Emma had returned safely from Europe and was pursuing graduate studies in international law inspired by her experience with Madison's criminal network to fight against organized fraud operations that targeted innocent families. Marcus Williams, Derek's private investigator, had established a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families recover from sophisticated fraud schemes using the skills and resources that had exposed Madison's crimes to protect other potential victims. Janet Peterson, the venue manager who had preserved Derek's letter and supported our family during the crisis, received recognition from law enforcement agencies for her role in gathering evidence that helped convict Madison and dismantle her criminal network. But the wedding's most meaningful aspect was the genuine happiness Derek and I shared, knowing our relationship had survived the most sophisticated attempt at destruction either of us had ever experienced. Our love had been tested by criminal manipulation, family pressure, and systematic deception, but it had emerged stronger and more certain than ever before. Derek's speech during our reception expressed gratitude not only for our love and family support, but also for the difficult experiences that had proven the strength of our commitment and the depth of our trust in each other. As we danced to the music we had originally chosen for our stolen wedding, I felt profound appreciation for Derek's determination to discover the truth, and for the courage of everyone who had helped expose Madison's criminal activities. Our first dance as husband and wife represented more than romantic celebration. It symbolized the triumph of genuine love over criminal deception and our determination to build a life based on honesty, trust, and mutual support. 2 years after our wedding, Derek and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Hope, in recognition of the optimism that had sustained us through our darkest moments and the bright future we were creating together. Hope's birth represented the ultimate victory over Madison's attempt to destroy our happiness and the beginning of a new generation that would be protected by the lessons we had learned about recognizing and resisting criminal manipulation. Derek's company had become one of America's most successful development firms with projects spanning multiple states and a reputation for integrity that attracted the most prestigious clients and challenging assignments. But Derek's greatest achievement was the family foundation we established together, providing support for fraud victims and funding law enforcement efforts to combat international criminal networks that targeted innocent families. Our foundation had helped hundreds of families recover from sophisticated fraud schemes while supporting research and education programs that helped people recognize and avoid criminal manipulation. Patricia had become one of Boston's most effective advocates for fraud victims, using her social influence and personal experience to raise awareness about criminal schemes while supporting law enforcement efforts to prevent future victimization. Harold had rebuilt his political consulting firm's reputation through transparent business practices and charitable activities, establishing himself as a trusted advisor who valued integrity above profit or social advancement. But our family's greatest transformation was the genuine love and trust that had replaced the competition and manipulation that had nearly destroyed our relationships. We had learned that family bonds built on truth and mutual support were stronger than any criminal scheme designed to exploit them for financial gain or personal advantage. Madison remained in federal prison, her criminal network dismantled, and her victims beginning the process of recovery and healing that would continue for years to come. But Madison's greatest failure was her inability to destroy the genuine love that had motivated Derek's determination to discover the truth and protect our relationship from her criminal manipulation. 3 years have passed since that devastating morning when I stood in my childhood bedroom watching Madison prepare for her stolen wedding, and reflecting on our journey from manipulation to justice fills me with profound gratitude for the strength we found to fight back against sophisticated criminal deception. Today, I'm preparing for a very different kind of celebration. Derek and I are hosting a charity gala at our home in Beacon Hill, raising funds for the foundation we established to help families recover from fraud and relationship scams. The guest list includes many of the same people who witnessed Madison's dramatic arrest, but tonight they're celebrating genuine achievements rather than elaborate lies. Our daughter Hope, now 18 months old, plays in the nursery, decorated with family photos that tell the real story of love surviving criminal attempts at destruction. Her laughter reminds me daily that Madison's attempt to steal our happiness ultimately led to blessings we never could have imagined during those dark weeks when our relationship seemed destroyed beyond repair. Derek's business empire has continued growing, with Morrison Development Group now managing projects across the eastern United States and establishing a reputation for integrity that attracts the most prestigious clients. But Derek's greatest pride comes from the lives we've been able to rebuild through our foundation's work with fraud victims and law enforcement agencies. Patricia has made a complete recovery from mercury poisoning and has become one of Boston's most effective advocates for elder abuse prevention and fraud awareness. Her transformation from confused victim to powerful advocate demonstrates the healing that's possible when truth replaces manipulation and genuine family support replaces criminal exploitation. Harold has rebuilt his political consulting firm around principles of transparency and ethical business practices, using lessons learned from Madison's deception to help other families recognize and resist sophisticated manipulation attempts. But our most meaningful achievement has been the relationships we've restored and strengthened through our commitment to honesty and mutual support. Last month, I had the privilege of meeting with Sarah Martinez, a young woman whose sister had begun exhibiting behavioral patterns remarkably similar to Madison's systematic manipulation tactics. Sarah had contacted our foundation after reading about our family's experience seeking guidance about protecting her family from someone she suspected was planning elaborate fraud schemes. Sarah's sister Carmen had recently returned from what she claimed was a successful modeling career in South America, but Carmen's stories contained inconsistencies, and her behavior showed signs of sophisticated deception training. Carmen was attempting to manipulate their elderly parents into changing inheritance arrangements, while positioning herself as the family's primary caretaker and financial decision-maker. Sarah's instincts told her something was seriously wrong, but Carmen's evidence seemed convincing, and their parents were beginning to question Sarah's motives for challenging her sister's claims about her success and financial stability. I spent several hours with Sarah sharing our family's experience and providing resources for investigating Carmen's background while protecting Sarah's parents from potential financial and emotional manipulation. The conversation reminded me how crucial it is for people to trust their instincts when family relationships suddenly change in ways that benefit one person while isolating or diminishing others. Within 2 weeks, Sarah's investigation revealed that Carmen had been involved in romance fraud schemes targeting elderly men in 3 South American countries, stealing their savings through elaborate stories about modeling contracts and business opportunities that required immediate financial investment. Carmen was planning to use similar techniques against their parents, gradually gaining control of their finances while isolating them from family members who might question her sudden transformation from struggling student to successful international model. Sarah's courage in investigating her sister's claims prevented significant financial losses and potentially saved her parents' lives, as Carmen's criminal associates were prepared to use violence against anyone who interfered with their fraud operations. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's attempt to push me out of the family business had ultimately elevated me to industry leadership far beyond anything I could have achieved within our original partnership structure. Her betrayal had forced me to discover professional possibilities I never would have explored if our collaboration had continued successfully. True family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, even when that harm comes from someone claiming to be family. It means valuing truth over comfort, safety over social appearances, and genuine relationships over financial advantages. I've learned that recognizing manipulation requires paying attention to behavioral patterns rather than accepting explanations that sound reasonable but don't align with observable actions. Madison's lies were sophisticated and convincing, but her behavior consistently served her interests while harming everyone around her. She isolated me from Derek, manipulated our parents' emotions, and systematically destroyed trust within our family relationships. Criminal manipulators create chaos and confusion to prevent their victims from thinking clearly about what's really happening. They exploit emotions like love, fear, and guilt to override logical analysis of their claims and behavior. The most important defense against manipulation is maintaining connections with people who genuinely care about your well-being and who can provide objective perspectives when emotions cloud your judgment. Derek's persistence in investigating the truth about our communication problems saved our relationship because he refused to accept that love could disappear so suddenly without explanation. His determination to understand what was happening demonstrated the difference between someone fighting for love and someone exploiting it for personal gain. I've also learned that criminal manipulation often targets the strongest relationships because destroying them creates the most chaos and provides the greatest opportunities for exploitation. Madison didn't target casual acquaintances or distant family members. She focused on destroying my relationship with Derek and my parents because those were the relationships that provided me with emotional support and protection from her schemes. When someone systematically attacks your most important relationships while positioning themselves as your protector or advisor, that's a clear warning sign of manipulation rather than genuine concern for your welfare. The foundation Derek and I established has helped over 200 families recover from sophisticated fraud schemes, and every case has reinforced the same crucial lesson: criminals count on their victims feeling ashamed, confused, and isolated rather than seeking help from law enforcement or support organizations. Madison's greatest weapon was the shame and embarrassment she created around Derek's supposed abandonment and criminal activities. She convinced our family that seeking outside help would create social embarrassment and damage our reputation within Boston's elite circles. Criminal manipulators exploit social pressures and family pride to prevent their victims from accessing resources that could expose their schemes and protect potential victims. The courage to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable or socially awkward is essential for protecting yourself and your family from sophisticated criminal manipulation. But the most profound lesson our family learned is that genuine love and commitment become stronger when tested by adversity, rather than weaker when challenged by difficulties. Derek's love for me motivated him to investigate the truth rather than accept Madison's explanations about our relationship's sudden deterioration. My love for Derek gave me strength to question Madison's claims, even when my family pressured me to accept her version of events. Real love fights for truth and understanding, rather than accepting convenient explanations that don't align with shared history and mutual knowledge. Madison's criminal manipulation ultimately failed because she underestimated the strength of genuine relationships built on truth, trust, and mutual support. Her schemes were sophisticated and well executed, but they couldn't destroy love that was authentic rather than superficial. As I watch Hope playing with toys Derek built for her in his workshop, I'm reminded daily that Madison's attempt to steal our happiness led to blessings that exceeded anything we originally planned or imagined. Our relationship survived criminal manipulation because we chose to fight for truth rather than accept comfortable lies. Our family relationships became stronger because we learned to value integrity over social appearances. The foundation we built from the ashes of Madison's fraud has helped hundreds of families avoid similar manipulation while supporting law enforcement efforts to prevent future victimization. Tonight's charity gala will raise funds to expand our fraud prevention education programs while honoring the law enforcement professionals who risk their careers and safety to protect innocent families from sophisticated criminal schemes. As guests arrive for this evening's celebration, they'll see evidence of what's possible when people choose courage over comfort and truth over convenience. Derek and I are living proof that love can survive the most sophisticated attempts at destruction, that families can rebuild trust after criminal manipulation, and that victims of fraud can transform their experiences into resources for protecting others. Our story began with devastating betrayal and criminal deception, but it became a testament to the power of genuine love, the importance of seeking truth even when it's difficult, and the strength that comes from supporting each other through the darkest challenges life can present. I hope our experience inspires others to trust their instincts when relationships suddenly change in unexplainable ways, to seek help when family dynamics become confusing or harmful, and to never give up fighting for love that's authentic and worth protecting. The greatest victory over criminal manipulation is the happiness and security that comes from building relationships based on honesty, trust, and mutual support, rather than accepting deception disguised as love or family loyalty. Madison thought she could steal our happiness by destroying our trust in each other. Instead, she taught us how precious genuine love really is, and how important it is to protect it from anyone who would exploit it for their own selfish purposes. 3 years later, I can honestly say that surviving Madison's criminal manipulation made Derek and me stronger as individuals and as a couple, while teaching our entire family lessons about recognizing and resisting sophisticated deception that will protect us for the rest of our lives. That's the most important gift we can give to Hope and to the families we help through our foundation work. The knowledge that genuine love and family bonds are stronger than any criminal scheme designed to destroy them, and the courage to fight for truth even when lies seem more convenient or comfortable. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone close to you seemed to change dramatically, causing you to question relationships you thought were solid? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below and how you navigated through moments when family loyalty conflicted with your instincts about what was really happening. Your stories could help other families recognize warning signs and find the courage to seek truth when they're facing manipulation that disguises itself as love or concern. Please like this video if our story resonated with you, subscribe to hear more about overcoming family challenges and relationship manipulation, and share this with anyone who might benefit from learning about the warning signs of sophisticated fraud schemes. Thank you for listening to our journey from betrayal to justice, and I wish you the strength to protect the relationships that truly matter. while having the wisdom to recognize when someone is trying to exploit your love and trust for their own selfish purposes. Remember that genuine family members want to see you happy and successful, while manipulators will systematically undermine your confidence and isolate you from people who genuinely care about your well-being. Trust your instincts, seek help when you need it, and never give up fighting for love that's real and worth protecting.